So I think the most important thing to understand in psychology is the idea of the frame of reference. And the frame of reference is basically a frame of qualities or psychological conditionings that we hold around ourselves that acts as an intermediary system between us and reality. And it has a great influence on how we perceive reality and how reality perceives us, and how we both interact with each other. Now, this frame of reference works in tandem with what we call in psychology a reticular activation system. Now, the reticular activation system is basically the part of our psychology that kind of makes what we believe or what we are thinking about or what is in our subconscious be identified in reality. So, an example of this would be two people are walking in the mall. One person is really stressed about work, they really need to get their printing done, and they're looking for the printing shop, and that's all they're trying to look for. They're not really paying attention to anything else. The other person is really hungry, so all they are seeing is the restaurants around them. So we have two people, one is happy, one is hungry, one is looking to get food, and all they see are restaurants, and another person who is stressed, who sees nothing but Postnet. Because of the reticular activation system, both of these people are having different, unique, subjective, psychological, and perceptual experiences of reality. One person is having a look at all the restaurants, and the other person is looking at the queue in the printing shop. Both of them are thinking very different things. Both of them are living in very different subjective realities. So the reticular, the reticular activation system, the reticular activation system is responsible for that mechanism. It's responsible for our basic subjective experience of reality through what we call a frame of reference. So if we were to draw this frame of reference out as a model, we would draw a little stick man in the middle of the white page. Around him we would draw a square. And around that we would draw a slightly bigger square, basically putting him in a picture frame. And as a basic exercise, we would ask the individual to write in all of the number one qualities that they identify with. Who do you think you are? And they would write these qualities within the frame. And this would be the first indicator as to what their frame of reference would maybe look like. As an exercise, you would fill in the base qualities and kind of allow the person to free associate the qualities that they wanted to write down in the first frame. And then you would draw another frame around that, which may represent broader qualities and identifications and associations that the individual might have within themselves and between them and the world. The first frame is usually core virtues, the core personality traits that one has. I'm an introvert. I score high on openness. I take myself to be an intuitive person, and I believe in astrology. Those all form part of the frame of reference. In a broader frame, maybe one perceives themselves within their social position. I'm a mother, I'm a sister, I'm a sibling. I am a entrepreneur. That might also be the sphere of what do you do within the world kind of thing. That's usually the second frame. So the first frame is who do I think I am as an individual? And the second frame is what do I do in the world? Because really those are the two kinds of major states that we are kind of dealing with, this inner state of who we think we are and so this would be the third frame, right? So the third frame would be how do we act in the world? So we can use this frame of reference metaphor as a really good self-exploration tool, as a tool of introspection. It's a really, really incredible metaphor, and it really encapsulates the general principle of the entirety of psychology, really, and how our mind and how our consciousness perceives itself and itself in relation to reality. So this is a very powerful metaphor for gaining insights into the nature of who we are, gaining insights into the nature of our environment, and how we relate to each other. And when we gain insights into the nature of this, we are able to live more harmoniously in the dynamics of life because we are able to perceive more of it. We are aware of how we are and how the world is and how we interact. And that's very valuable knowledge. You know, I do believe that everybody has the right to psychoeducation. Everybody has the right to psychoeducation. Everybody has the right to have insights into the way of themselves, into the nature of their own being, and the nature of others. And what I particularly like about this kind of metaphor is its simplicity and its undeniability. That really is how things are, and I don't think many of us can really deny that. Um, we can't prove anything psychologically. In reality, psychology is actually a pseudoscience because we don't have any kind of technology that can measure the qualities of consciousness. We can only study its behavior and make assumptions on its absolute nature based on that. But in reality, in a very materialistic scientific methodology, psychology can kind of be seen as a semi-pseudoscience. Okay, it's relevant enough that we can all agree we have subjective experience, but we can't scientifically really prove or understand exactly what that is. And I really do believe that is where the the entire field of psychologies may sometimes have a tendency to fall short, unless we take into considerations theories like Carl Jung and existential psychologies and spiritual psychologies. You know, something else I like to do with this exercise is have the individual draw themselves within the frame and make a labeled diagram. So an arrow pointing to the frame saying how I am, and an arrow pointing to the person saying who I am, which clearly makes a distinction between oneself and one's psychological perception of reality. You see, the biggest source of our suffering really is that we have this tendency to identify with our own psychological states, particularly the negative ones. We cling on to the negative ones a lot more strongly than the positive ones because, as biological animals, we have this natural tendency to move away from uncomfortability. So, our brain and our psychology is designed to give us quite a psychological shock reaction to anything that is uncomfortable or unpleasant or painful in any kind of way. So we do have this tendency to identify more with negative emotions, and the ego that we are operating with, we're really talking about the ego here. Um, is, you know, there's this metaphor that I like to say: the ego is like your mother. It loves you unconditionally, and it will do anything to protect you, even if that means inadvertently harming you in some kind of way. You know, and sometimes moms can do that. They love us so much that they smother us and they stop us from getting world experience. And sometimes the ego can do that by making us believe that we are not worthy of certain things in the world, like having friends or finding love or whatever it may be. So I think as part of psychoeducation, I think it's very important that we allow people to draw a distinction between who they are and how they are. Because realistically, if we look at it from a logical perspective, the personality is not who you are. The personality is a dependent factor on your relationship with the environment. So it grows throughout your lifetime, it develops as you do, it's never constant, it's never a fixed thing. A person can be one way in one time and then 1 year later have a completely different personality relation to reality. So it's important to know that the personality isn't the self, basically, is what we're trying to say.